Hey everyone, we are here getting started with Project 5. It's called Take It Apart, Put It Back Together, an analysis project. So I'm going to briefly walk you through the handout and then we'll start our little test paintings. It asks us to get started to find a painter that we'd like to analyze. Research several of their paintings, but just choose one or two for the analysis and one for the written part. Here's a series of links of contemporary art magazines and blogs and social media channels where you can find some painters to look at. And if you're not sure, reach out to me and I can help you find somebody. The person that we're going to look at for my example is a painter named Jorg Dressler. And I found his work on the Jealous Curator on her Instagram page. And I reached out to Jorg and asked him if I could use his work for an example. And he said yes. And I was so excited. Okay. So I chose my artist. Now it's asking us for the Take It Apart section. We're going to do a little research. We're going to do a formal, subjective, and a conceptual analysis of the work. So I'm going to read this to you. To analyze. It's to take something apart, to investigate how it is built. It is to examine in a detailed way the structure of something, typically for the purpose of explanation and interpretation. So we're going to try to interpret someone else's work, really analyze it. We're going to try to examine, study, investigate, scrutinize, evaluate, consider, question, explore, and dissect their work so that we can find our own vocabulary of form, subject, and concept to work with. So this is going to be a three-part analysis. We're going to do a formal analysis, then a subjective analysis, and then a conceptual analysis. In your handout, attached at the end of this document, is a two-dimensional design glossary of terms handout. I want you to use this glossary of terms to help you do your formal analysis. So for instance, in the glossary of terms, it defines things like composition, picture plane, visual hierarchy, and then it goes into breaking down your principles of design. They're continued. Then your elements of design. Still more elements, so on and so forth. And then it talks about a couple different other terms. But our example is specifically just looking at line. So if we, and I want you to kind of go through the whole handout and analyze your painting. But here where it says line, it's a point in motion, a series of adjacent points, a connection between points, an implied connection between points. Lines can divide, connect, define. There can be calligraphic lines. There can be varying line weight. Heavier lines come forward, receding lines are smaller. There can be gestural, expressive. So I go through and I am looking at my example and trying to figure out his use of line. He uses hard edge lines to define boundaries and uses these lines to create multiple shapes of varying scale. He uses skinny rectangles of broken color that read like lines, and they direct the viewer around the picture plane. He's using implied lines to help us connect the viewer to his focal point and create tension. He's using organic, complicated lines for the natural parts of the painting, and then hard-edged ones in a juxtaposition. It creates a nice push and pull in the painting, having that tension with the line work. Portions of the landscape imagery are cut with these hard edges, while some are painted with these more natural edges. And he also uses an implied line, creating a false picture plane, making the landscape feel farther away and unattainable. So start here, but work through your whole glossary of terms. And it doesn't have to take forever. Just like think, what is the line doing? And be that dissecting, that specific, that considering, that much of a scrutiny of how they're using each part of the glossary of terms. Then when you complete that, the other answers will probably come pretty easily. The next one, it says to do a subjective analysis. So the subjective meaning, what's the subject? It isn't necessarily the time to write what the painting means or stands for, or what its concept is, but just really what are the images that are in it. And then we'll get to the content in the next one. I wrote, there's broken landscapes, seascapes, scenes of nature, free from the human condition. The landscapes are often in a stage of movement or tumultuousness. He uses flat areas of color to look like a void, small rectangles of color blips across the surface of flat fields of color that create visual energy and movement throughout the composition. And some of the nature is left to be rendered in its natural space, like here, while other portions are disrupted by broken and geometric edges. So some of it's recapturing the formal analysis, but really starting to talk about what the imagery looks like. And then the next one is, what's the concept? It says, take a guess at what you think the work is about. Works can be about something huge. The big concept, it could be something like solving world peace, but it could really be something simple like pink rectangles look really good next to yellow ones, and it's playful to look at in a decorative way. So don't feel like the concepts have to be earth-shattering. They can be at varying degrees, but you are trying to get at the point for why maybe the artist made the work. So I researched his biography. I researched his artist statement to get some hints, but my guess was kind of close. I had said something to the effect of maybe the work is about the inability for nature to conform. It also seems to maybe be a comment on the history of romantic landscape painting and how that relates to other paintings throughout the ages, like some of the neo-geometric works from the 80s, or some of the flat pop art type backdrops. So, start to figure out what you think the work is about, and then research your person to find out if they can tell you what it's about. Okay, so that is the research part. Maybe spend a day working on that to get started, so you're really kind of building some ideas about someone else's work. But in the end, this is really time to make our own paintings. We have been doing master studies throughout the course of the semester, and this isn't really a master study. This is just an analysis so that then we can come together and make some of our own choices and to bring things into focus. So this is the painting part. We're going to take it apart. So we are going to start by analyzing our artist with 4 small little paintings. It says we're going to create 4 sheets of 4 little paintings, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I cut 2 sheets of canvas paper in half to make this happen. And then I taped them down in a nice way. And even though these are just little investigative studies, I'm hoping that I might end up with something that is fairly resolved as a little series, or little surfaces that I can build upon later. So it says, on each small surface, try to separate the work you're analyzing by only painting individual parts of your research work. Deconstruct this painting into separate parts so it can analyze each section. So some ideas or things to consider. Just paint the background, just paint the middle ground, just paint the foreground, paint only the highlights, paint only the lowlights, maybe just paint simple blocks of color. You come up with your own ways to deconstruct the work so that you can find your own ways to paint, to construct a pictorial space of your own. And then once we finish these, which I'm going to show you in a second, we'll get back together in another video, and this is the take it apart, then the put it back together part, where it says, create a resolved final work based on your research and analysis. The scale is up to you, and it's not a master study. We're not trying to make a painting that looks like the person we're looking at. We should be making our own work based on our analysis, though, just like any other researcher would build upon a body of work. So it says, for the form, using your new knowledge of how to use the form of your research painting, decide which parts you might use. And this is where these investigations will come from. From looking at our example artist, I'm going to try to use large broken shapes, flat backgrounds, and maybe small blocks of color similar to his, but with a different color palette and maybe trapezoids instead of rectangles. And I'm not sure yet until I start painting. It's in, I don't know. It's the not knowing that's fun right now, how I can translate it or come up with a different way to see where it goes. And then the subject, he was using landscapes and like some pretty bold graphic design elements. I'm going to use floral imagery, which I'll show you in a second. And then the content, I had come to realize or think that his was something about fleeting moments and a sense of absence and tension, and that mine are going to be kind of similar in that. And then I'm going to be taking the still life image as the idea of natura morte, dead nature, fleeting moments through flowers not lasting. Okay, so here is some of my research information visually. So here is Jörg Dressler's work. Again, I asked him for permission to do an analysis of his work, and we can share with him when we're done. Pretty cool. I have another one of his, a couple of his. So I'm going to put these near so I can be inspired by him, but really coming up with my own kind of sets of information. And then these are maybe how I was thinking of my own subject coming together. So using the floral image, using the ribbon image. And these photos were taken by my friend, and the imagery of the ribbons and the flowers and the stationery are also made by some other friends of mine. So none of this is just straight up Google images. I'm borrowing it from people that I know are okay with me using it for inspiration. So here we go. Maybe I'll stop the video and then start a new one. That could be the intro video, and then we'll start a new one and I'll get started on these. Okay, see you in a second.